What's up, future college superstars? Laura here with STP. And if you're trying to improve your English score on the SAT, there's no better way to do it than with knowing the grammar rules front and back. So in this video today, we are going to dive into tips and tricks for grammar that are slicker than your latest IG post. Forget those old dusty textbooks, because in this video, we're going to just break everything down super simply, and I'm gonna link down in the description the document that I'm using to walk you through all these tips. If you want more than just this document for the video, go ahead and click the link up here, because we're actually giving away our English workbook for free for a limited time. So there's way more exercises, activities, tips, strategies, questions in there. Go grab that today. And by the end of this video, the goal is for you to spot grammar issues and grammar problems quicker than your friend can spot a TikTok trend.
You know how long I've been waiting for this? Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself, yeah.
Before we get started though, do something good for yourself today. If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button and notification bell below. Because if you take all of Taylor Swift's hit songs, then multiply that by 1,000, we've helped at least that many students, if not more. All right, guys, the first thing I want to cover is subject-verb agreement, because so many students get that wrong. So just a heads up, if I have a statement that says the box of chocolates are on the table, that is incorrect, because the subject is actually singular. It's the box. Now, this thing right here of chocolates, that's called a prepositional phrase. So that, since it starts with an of, is just describing more about the subject. So prepositional phrases typically, they denote like location a lot of the time. So you might see around, under, through, by. Those are all prepositions. Of is a huge one on the SAT. So if you're in a question with a verb, you got to pick the right verb tense, and you see an of somewhere before the blank, you probably have a prepositional phrase and you've got to cross that out. So all that's extra. I'm going to get rid of it. And then when you read the subject next to the verb, now you can see it sounds really bad. I don't say the box are on the table. I would say the box is on the table. Okay, let's look at another example. Sometimes with subject-verb agreement, the SAT will hide the subject from the verb, not with a prepositional phrase, but with a non-essential clause. So a non-essential clause is essentially something that doesn't need to be there for the sentence to make sense and for the sentence to stand on its own. So when I read example 2, it says the commissioner, along with his 20 staff members, run a tight campaign against the incumbent. Well, my subject is really the commissioner, and all of this stuff in between two commas, that is a non-essential clause. So that's what you're looking for. Non-essential clauses, they go between two commas, two dashes, two parentheses, and you basically want to ask yourself, if I cross that out, will the sentence still make sense? It sure will. I could say the commissioner run a tight campaign, and actually I want to cross this off to hear my subject right next to my verb, and then I realize it sounds silly. It should say the commissioner runs a tight campaign, because commissioner is singular. So just be ready for those tricks that they'll throw at you, because they just like to put lots of words in between the subject and the verb. Let's look at a couple examples. So here's an example of a question. It says, although, well, first of all, let's just talk strategies. The blank isn't until the second sentence. So I'm not even going to read this first sentence, because that's just going to be a waste of my time, especially on module 2, because module 2, we're so tight with time, the reading passages take so long, you need to cut corners wherever you possibly can. The next thing I want you to do after you determine there's some parts that you don't need to read is to look at the answer choices. When you're on a grammar question, the answer choices will essentially tell you what they're testing you on. So when I see verb tenses here, I am thinking two things. One, subject-verb agreement, and I always start there. Two, parallelism. Okay? How will I know which type of question I'm on? I'll know because I'm going to play the pronoun trick. So if the pronoun trick works, it's a subject verb. If the pronoun trick doesn't work, it's a parallelism. So let me demonstrate. I'm going to take a singular pronoun and a plural pronoun, and I'm going to test the answer choices with them. I would say he is, they are, they have been, and they were. So there is a variation in singular and plural, meaning it's going to be a subject-verb agreement question. And typically, the answer that's right is the one that's different. So I'm already leaning towards the is because it's the only singular answer choice. How can we know for sure? Well, up in the sentence, here's my blank, and I see a prepositional phrase of sonic booms. That means the word right before it is my subject. I'm going to cross off of sonic booms, and now I'm going to read it. For engineers, the elimination is one of the biggest challenges. So since the subject is singular, you need to pick a singular verb. Now I want you to try the next one. So pause the video, give this a try, and then play the video again. Okay, you should have had a minute to try this one out. So again, you see the answer choices, they're verb tenses. Is it a subject-verb agreement? Well, let's find out. I would say he brings, they have brought, and then bringing, I don't say he bringing or they bringing. So that one doesn't really count. If you put it in the sentence, that one's gonna sound silly, so we're just gonna get rid of that one completely. Now, when I look at it, because there is a variation singular and plural, I'm already thinking, okay, it's probably A. Here's my blank. And again, I see another prepositional phrase of the world's largest folk art festivals. So I'm going to cross that off. Right before it is the word one. That means one is the subject. So it would be one brings together artists because it's singular. So that's how you tackle a subject-verb agreement. All right, now let's talk parallelism. So if that pronoun trick does not hold and there's no variation in singular and plural, you're probably on a parallelism question. Parallelism essentially requires you to understand the different verb tenses and how they're used, and then to recognize in the text what verb tense they're already written in or they're using and make sure yours matches that. So some of these things in this table are pretty obvious. I mean, present tense, you might say like he is. That's pretty simple. Past tense, you might say he was. Future tense, you will say he will be. Now, I want you to star these two, past perfect, present perfect. These are the ones that really mess students up. These are the ones they're testing on the digital SAT that they did not test on the paper test. So first, past perfect is something that's ongoing in the past and stops at some point in the past. So to give you an example, you would say he had been. So you're looking for the word had. That makes it in the past, ongoing in the past, but done in the past. Present perfect is ongoing in the past as well, but it continues on in the present. So you would say he has been. So essentially, you're looking for a has, and that makes it present perfect. One thing to note is that the word since typically starts a modifier on the SAT, which is basically the introduction to a sentence. And that is a sign that you need to pick a present perfect verb. So let's just do like a couple examples so you can get a sense of how to tackle this. So as you can see, the blank isn't until down here. Well, so we're not going to read all of this because this is a grammar question. We don't really need context. What we're going to do now is recognize there's a modifier here that says today. So that means it's present tense. So all I need to do is say today Pac is considered the first video artist because I need it to be parallel with the modifier. Why don't you try one? All right, so same deal. Pause the video, give this a try, and then you can play it and see the solution. All right, so you should have had a chance to try this one out. Now, you might have noticed the modifier in this case says since that time, meaning it was going on in the past and it's still continuing on in the present. That means we need to pick a present perfect verb, so we have to go with has remained. Parallel to the modifier, okay? Since that time is the modifier or the introduction to the sentence, we need our verb tense to match that. That's parallelism. How do I know that it wasn't a subject-verb agreement question? Well, if I do the pronoun trick, I could say he had remained, he has remained, he remained, and he remains. So I can use all of them in a singular context. That's how I know I need to switch to parallelism for this. Okay, another key thing, if you want to dominate the grammar, is you have to know your punctuation rules inside and out. And there are key ones that the SAT will test on this new digital version. So let's start by talking about the colon. First things first, with a colon, you have to have a complete sentence or an independent clause on the left. On the right-hand side, anything goes. Could be complete, could be incomplete. It could be a list. But guys, I don't want you to think a colon is just for lists, because it's not. I have so many students come to me and they just think that that's the only usage of it. And I can promise you on this test, they're probably not going to use a colon with a list. That's just not how it works here. But the biggest thing that I want you to understand is this side of the colon explains more about the statement made on the left. So if a statement is made and then they go into more detail about it or describe more about it or explain more about it, you probably need the colon. Let's talk about the semicolon. The semicolon, you need to have a complete sentence on both sides, or an independent clause, if you like to call it an independent clause. So basically a semicolon is like a fancy period. It just separates two complete sentences. If you don't have two complete sentences, you can't use a semicolon, except there is one other usage of it that College Board has been testing a lot lately. I want you to be ready for this, especially if you're taking the test sometime in 2024, because I've noticed that this is trending, where the semicolon can also be used to separate items in a list. So a way I like to think about it, which is kind of interesting, off to the side, I'm going to draw a semicolon for you guys. So here's my dot, here's my comma. A semicolon can function like a period, or it can function like a comma. Why would someone use semicolons to separate items in a list when they can just use commas? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is if the items in the list are super, super long, like lots of words, so it's hard to tell, you know, where the divisions are between the items. Second thing is if the items in the list already have commas within them. For instance, if I'm listing cities and I say Paris, comma, France, London, comma, England, it would be better for me to separate those cities and their countries with semicolons and not commas. Let's talk about the comma rule. So the comma rule basically is that a comma cannot separate two complete sentences. So if you have a complete sentence on both sides, do not pick the comma. However, on this test, sometimes what College Board is doing is they're putting an and, like a comma and an and, or a comma and a but. A comma and some kind of fanboys, if they give you that, then you can separate those two independent clauses and you're good to go. So just be ready for that. The last rule is that you cannot separate non-essential information by mixing and matching punctuation marks. So if I have a non-essential piece of information, which we talked about earlier, I can't start it with a comma and then end it with a dash. Comma goes with commas, dashes go with dashes, okay? So let's look at some punctuation questions and I'll give you some strategies. First strategy, and again, this goes back to when you're on a grammar question, I always want you to start by looking at the answer choices. If you look at the answer choices, this will give you a sense of what kind of question you are on. So when I look at these answer choices, I'm going, oh, okay, they give me a period, semicolon, comma. I think I'm on a punctuation question. But what's really great is two of those punctuation marks function the same exact way. So because because a semicolon and a period both separate two complete sentences, I'm gonna cross them off right away. That's your strategy number one. If you're finding this video helpful so far, by the way, show me some love. Make sure you hit that like button below. Oh, by the way, if you wanted to work this one out, then we have to basically read from here. If you're trying to decide if there's a comma or no comma, you have a couple options. one strategy that I use with my students is I just have them read it out loud and listen to where they pause, okay? This works for maybe 75% of my students. 25% have a tough time doing that. But let's start by doing that first, and you guys can determine if I'm pausing between writers and among or not. So I have the haiku-like poems of Thomas Tranströmer, which present nature and dream-influenced images in crisp, spare language, have earned the Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary writers. Among them, Nigerian-American essayist and novelist Teju Cole, who has written that Tranströmer's works contain a luminous simplicity. I definitely had to pause between writers and among. So I would go with D, which is the comma. Well, we have to ask ourselves too, why? Why is there a comma there? Okay, well, it's because that means this part right here, among them, Nigerian American essayist and novelist Teju Cole, because it's now between these two commas, right here and right here, it makes that part non-essential. Why is it non-essential? Because I already know enough from the context. I know we're talking about leading contemporary writers. So this is just extra information. We're giving us an example of one of the leading contemporary writers, but it's specific enough already. I know what group they're talking about. I don't necessarily need that to understand the sentence. So essentially, I could take that whole part out. I could say, have earned the Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary writers. Now, the funny thing is, this very last part is also a continuation explaining more about Teju Cole. So really, the whole green part and the whole yellow part that I just highlighted at the very end there is all non-essential. We could end the sentence with writers, but that explains why you need a comma there. Okay, here is another strategy for you guys. If you see a semicolon already in the sentence, I want you to pick the semicolon, especially if you notice the semicolon comes right before the word and. If it comes before the word and, they are certainly listing three things and using semicolons to separate the items. So you're going to go with B because there's a semicolon there. Now, just a heads up, I have seen questions, I've seen one question where there were semicolons in the text and the answer was not a semicolon. And this was because there was already two semicolons in the text separating out the three pieces of information. And it turned out on that question, you actually needed a colon. So that's another thing I want you to keep in mind. A colon and semicolons can exist in one sentence together. What happened was the first part of the sentence made a statement, then there was a colon, and then they went on to explain more about it, and they listed three things separated with semicolons. So, rule of thumb, if you see one semicolon, pick the semicolon. Especially if that one semicolon you see comes with an and. If you see two semicolons, they've already completed the separation of the three items in a list, pick something else. Okay? I had a student ask me, well, Laura, will they ever list 4 items? No, they will not. They have never listed 4 items. They always list 3. I hate to say never, though. I really hope I don't eat my words there, but they've always historically listed 3 things. So something to keep in mind. Okay, strategy number 3. If you're trying to decide between a comma or a no comma, first things first, you want to determine if a clause is non-essential or not. So for instance, the way that they wrote C, they made aluminum oxide non-essential. Now, when I read it in there, it says recently engineer EF of Tampere University in Finland used the chemical compound aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid. If I take out aluminum oxide, that's a really important part of the sentence. I don't know what chemical compound she's using. So that is essential information. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if you have a description before the name, typically you don't need commas anyways. I could read right through it. So because I want to keep aluminum oxide in there, because I can read right through that without pausing, I don't need commas. I'm going to go with D. One other thing that you should keep in mind is, let's just pretend you were struggling on this one and you were going between B and D and you just weren't sure which one to pick, because sometimes students will overthink these comma placement questions. If you're not sure, pick the one with less commas in it. Picking the one with less commas in it will definitely give you a higher probability of getting the question right, I promise you. So play the odds. If you were at a casino, you want to give yourself the best odds of winning money, right? Same here. Go with the one with no commas if you're not sure. All right, another strategy for punctuation is using majority rules for apostrophes. Sometimes apostrophes confuse some students I've worked with too. So before we get into the actual strategy, I think it is important for you to understand the difference between like brothers, where the apostrophe is on the inside of the S, versus brothers, where it's on the outside of the S, okay? So this one is a singular possessive. So it basically means one brother is owning something. Like I would say, my brother's toothbrush. This one is a plural possessive. So that basically means a group of brothers, maybe there's 2, 3, 4 brothers, they own something together. And let's hope they don't own a toothbrush together, because that's just gross. Maybe we would say the brothers' lake house, right? So anyways, that's what they test a lot on the SAT, but you can just get a little shysty and just do this really cool trick. So when I look at the 4 answer choices, I am going to just focus on the first word. And I'm going to ask myself, what 2 look the same, what 2 look different? So the 2 that look the same, I'm going to keep. That's B and D. So I'm getting rid of A because that's a different stories. I'm getting rid of C, that's a different stories. Now I'm going to look at the second word, events. And I'm going to play the same game. I'm going to say, what 2 events look the same, what 2 look different? When I look at this, A and B look the same, C and D, those events look different. So I would cross off D, and so B must be the right answer. This works 95% of the time. So if you're stuck when all else fails, go ahead and use majority rules for apostrophes. Okay, I mentioned earlier in the video something about modifiers, but we need to talk about modifiers again because they will test this as its own question, and so many students get burned by this. So a modifier basically is introducing what the sentence is about to be talking about. It has not mentioned the subject yet, but it gives you an idea of what the subject is or what the subject's about. So essentially, when I read this modifier, which says, as the country with the most megacities in the world, comma, right after that, I need my subject. I mean immediately after that. The next word after this intro comma is going to be the subject. Now the subject is the country with the most megacities. So I need to pick a country. So when I'm choosing between those 3 options, I'm gonna go with China. That should be the next word. Why don't you guys try this next one? So if it says arguably the most influential artwork of the Renaissance period, blank, what would you put in the blank? If you pick the David, you're right. The David is an artwork, so that's why it will be the subject, because it goes with the modifier and what the modifier is describing the subject as. Okay, Michelangelo is not artwork. The David shape is not artwork, that's its shape, so we have to go with the David. Okay, so these can get a little tricky for that reason. Some of the answer choices are gonna sound really, really good, but only one of them is right. You will know you're on a modifier example because you'll notice there will be a blank right after a comma. And if it sounds like it's leading into something or introducing something, you're definitely on a modifier question. You'll also notice the answer choices look similar, right? Like what they do is they make them all worded similarly to each other, but they start, the first word is different. Now, why did I highlight researcher Robert Losey's argument in B? That's because that would be the subject, because we have this apostrophe here. So really the focus is on the argument. The argument is, so the argument is going with the verb. So really we have to decide, is the subject researcher Robert Losey Is it researcher Robert Losey's argument? Is it domestication? Or is it the argument? So when we read the modifier, let's see what it says. So the modifier says, since uncovering fragments of a 2,000-year-old reindeer training harness in northern Siberia, blank. Okay, whatever the subject is uncovering fragments. Can the argument uncover fragments? Nope. Can domestication uncover fragments? Nope. Can researcher Robert Losey's argument uncover fragments? No. The only subject that makes sense is researcher Robert Losey, and that's why you have to go with A. All right, go ahead, you try this example too. Pause the video. All right, you should have had a chance to try this example. So the modifier is named in 1999 as one of the greatest achievements by a US chemist. So it's one of the greatest achievements. We need it to be a great achievement. Julian is not a great achievement. Even though his mom might think so, she's probably the only one. So we're going to get rid of A. In 1935 is not a great achievement. If anything, it was kind of a bad time. I mean, it was like the Great Depression. So we should probably get rid of B. Julian's 1935 synthesis could be a great achievement. Let's hold that. Would the alkaloid be a great achievement? Well, the alkaloid's just a thing. Can I say calcium's a great achievement? No, so that doesn't make sense. So the answer is C, because the subject is the synthesis of the alkaloid, which is an achievement. All right, guys, that is it for today's video. Those are some grammar hacks, tips, and tricks to help you slay the grammar, especially those tricky ones on Module 2. Go ahead and comment below and let me know what other things you need help with on the English, because I just want to be able to give you guys as much strategies and approaches as possible. If you're in a bit of a time crunch and you can't wait for my weekly videos to come out, I would definitely recommend you sign up for my self-paced digital SAT English course. I already have over 300 students in the course. They're doing phenomenally. There's exclusive videos, there's materials you can't get anywhere else, and it really walks you through all the strategies and tips and tricks you need to get every type of English question right. So I will link to the course up here. Just a heads up, since you are a YouTube viewer of my channel, I'm giving $50 off for you guys. So just put the promo 50 off in at checkout. And until next time, guys, happy prepping.